You ever feel like the PlayStation 1 was hiding an entire secret library of RPG gems that no one talks about? While everyone was busy worshipping Final Fantasy and Chrono Cross, some absolute masterpieces got shoved into the darkest corners of memory cards. So today, we're dusting off those forgotten titles, diving headfirst into 10 RPGs from the PS1 era that deserved way more love than they ever got. Let's be honest. Threads of Fate never stood a chance in a console library dominated by the likes of Final Fantasy and Chrono Cross. It showed up at the tail end of the PS1's life cycle, quietly minding its own business, blending platforming with action RPG elements. It wasn't loud, didn't beg for attention, but for the lucky few who gave it a shot, it left a lasting impression. This wasn't the kind of game that tried to melt your brain with a deep plot or a million side quests. It was breezy, relaxing, and the kind of title you boot up when you just want to vibe with something fun and oddly charming. It didn't carry the marketing muscle of its Squaresoft siblings, but it had just enough polish, creativity, and heart to earn a cult following. And now, looking back, it feels like one of those games that deserved so much more than the quiet corner it got shelved into. Dig a little deeper and you'll find that Threads of Fate was doing some pretty clever stuff for its time. The entire game is built around a dual protagonist system, Rue and Mint, each offering a totally different perspective on the story with unique gameplay styles to match. Rue focuses on physical combat and shape-shifting, while Mint leans into spellcraft. The two campaigns intertwine in small but satisfying ways, revealing new angles as you progress through both routes. It also features a combo-based attack system that adds a rhythmic feel to the action. Simple enough to pick up, but surprisingly rewarding once you start experimenting. And let's not skip over the level design. Despite its age, the game's mix of vertical platforming and semi-open environments still holds up surprisingly well. It's the kind of low-key brilliance that makes you wonder why more people aren't still talking about this game.
What the heck? I'll get Lumina, and then I'm out of here!
Now here's a game that went full anime fever dream in the best way possible. Brave Fencer Musashi. This isekai-style action RPG drops a spiky-haired sword kid straight into a fantasy kingdom that needs saving. Because of course it does. And somehow makes the whole thing feel less cliché and more chaotic fun. It's like someone at Squaresoft decided to take a break from brooding heroes and tragic backstories and just go wild with energy, color, and pure PS1 weirdness. What makes Brave Fencer Musashi stand out isn't just the charm, which it has in buckets, but how much variety it packs into a single game. One minute you're slicing up monsters, the next you're solving puzzles, platforming across cliffs, or stealing enemy abilities by literally absorbing them with your sword. It's got that anything-goes vibe that feels like a Saturday morning cartoon turned into a surprisingly deep action RPG. And somehow, despite the madness, it works beautifully. Under the hood, Musashi pulls off some pretty slick stuff for its time too. The combat blends hack-and-slash mechanics with light RPG elements like leveling, stat progression, and ability collection. But it doesn't stop there. You've got a real-time day and night cycle that affects NPC routines and quests, adding depth to what could have been just another dungeon run. Even Musashi himself has to manage sleep and hunger, which might sound annoying, but actually keeps you thinking about your choices outside of combat. Oh, and did I mention the voice acting? For a late 90s RPG, the fact that it's fully voiced and not completely awful is kind of a miracle. If you're hunting for a PS1 game that breaks the mold without breaking your patience, Brave Fencer Musashi is it? Now, if you're into tactical RPGs and somehow missed Tearing Saga, buckle up, because this one's got some serious pedigree. We're talking about a game made by the actual creator of Fire Emblem, Shuzu Kaga, after he parted ways with Nintendo and decided to go rogue. The result was a game that basically screams classic Fire Emblem, but with just enough changes to keep the lawyers pacing. It's dramatic, punishing, and weirdly charming in that retro way only a PS1 game can pull off. Back in the day, people called it Fire Emblem for PlayStation, and yeah, that label fits like a glove. The art style, the music, the turn-based grid warfare, everything feels like it was pulled from Kaga's old notebooks and turned into something bigger, a bit bolder, and maybe even slightly unhinged in the best way. It didn't just ride the tactical wave kicked off by Final Fantasy Tactics. It surfed it with full confidence, even if half the audience didn't realize it existed. But what really sets Tearing Saga apart is how deep it goes with customization and unit development. Characters level up with growth rates tied to their individual traits, which means every soldier in your army evolves differently depending on how you use them. Want a speedy sword fighter who dodges everything? Train them that way. Prefer a slow, tanky wall of pain? That's an option too. Plus, there's no hand-holding here. Terrain affects movement and accuracy, support bonuses play a crucial role, and one wrong decision can send your best unit straight to the grave. Permanently. The permadeath hits hard, especially when you've spent hours molding someone into a beast only to watch them get crit sniped by a nobody with a javelin. Classic Kaga chaos. Bottom line, if you ever wondered what Fire Emblem might have looked like outside Nintendo's walls, Tearing Saga is your answer. And it absolutely earns a spot in this list of underrated legends. Alright, let's talk about Vandal Hearts. A tactical RPG so sharp it could cut through Konami's current identity crisis. Back in 1996, when Konami still knew how to make actual games, and not just slot machines with vampire branding, Vandal Hearts landed on the PS1 like a tactical mic drop. It wasn't flashy, and didn't have cinematic cutscenes every 10 minutes or overwrought melodrama. What it did have was strategy, grit, and blood. Literal geysers of it. It's honestly wild how this game managed to be so good, and yet fly so far under the radar. Maybe it was the stiff competition, maybe it was Konami being too busy juggling Metal Gear and Castlevania, or maybe Vandal Hearts was just too smart for its own time. From a gameplay perspective, Vandal Hearts doesn't mess around. You're dropped into grid-based maps with permanent consequences. One wrong decision and you're toast. But what really sets it apart is how clean and fast the combat feels. It avoids the usual slow, sluggish pace of many tactical RPGs from that era. Actions are snappy, turns fly by, and the game never makes you sit through animations that feel like they were animated by someone trapped in molasses. Units evolve into advanced classes that dramatically shift your strategy mid-game, and enemy placement constantly forces you to think 3 moves ahead. Plus, let's not forget the branching story paths and political twists that actually affect how the game plays out. It might look simple on the surface, but under the hood, there's a lot more depth than you'd expect from a game that can make your battlefield look like a horror scene after one sword strike. Either way, it became one of those cult classics that strategy fans still whisper about when they're tired of pretending Fire Emblem is the only thing keeping the genre alive. And no, Konami's not bringing it back anytime soon. They're too busy reviving franchises like it's a corporate seance. Hey, quick break. If you're enjoying the video so far, go ahead and drop a like. It takes less than half a second and helps way more than you'd think. Also, let me know in the comments. What's the most underrated PS1 RPG you ever played? Or just tell me which one deserves a comeback more than your favorite canceled cartoon. Comments really help the algorithm push this video to more people, and honestly, it's the best way to support the channel. Plus, I read and reply to every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, come on, Don't be that person who binge watches and vanishes like a summon spell. Hit that sub button. There's more RPG chaos coming your way. Next up is Wild Arms 2. And listen, if you thought the first game was all this series had to offer, you've been seriously missing out. The sequel doesn't just hold up. It tightens everything the original started, cranks the dial on the Western RPG fusion, and ends up delivering an experience that's cleaner, sharper, and honestly more confident across the board. While Wild Arms 1 gets a lot of nostalgic praise, Wild Arms 2 is the one that actually figures out what it wants to be and runs with it. Bigger world, better pacing, deeper characters. Yeah, it earns its spot. Under the hood, Wild Arms 2 introduces the Force system, which builds up a gauge during combat based on your actions. As that gauge fills, characters can unleash powerful Force abilities, some of which are tied to character-specific roles, adding a unique flavor to each party member. You've also got the return of tools outside of battle, which turn exploration into a puzzle-solving experience. These aren't just gimmicks. They're key to unlocking hidden paths, secrets, and even bonus bosses. On top of that, battles use a front and back row system that actually matters, forcing you to think about placement and synergy instead of just spamming your strongest attack. It's also one of those rare cases where a sequel fixes a bunch of stuff without losing the heart of what made the original special. The mix of fantasy and Old West still hits, the soundtrack's just as atmospheric, and the turn-based combat brings way more strategic depth this time around. And hey, if you're feeling fancy, there's a new version floating around with trophy support on modern PlayStation consoles. Sure, it's not a full-blown remake, let's just call it a port with attitude. But it's a solid excuse to revisit one of Sony's most underrated RPG franchises. Next up is Legend of Legaia. And if you've never heard of it, pay attention, because this game went harder than it had any right to. It showed up late in the PS1's life cycle, when most developers were squeezing every last drop of power from that gray little box. And somehow, Legaia still managed to stand out. While other RPGs were busy flexing cinematics and melodrama, this one said, "Forget the fluff. Let's make combat feel incredible." And that's exactly what it did. The world building is solid and the story is classic RPG material with a mysterious world plagued by a deadly mist. But the real showstopper here was the combat system. So good you'll wonder why more games didn't steal it. It was tactical, it was satisfying, and it made random encounters feel like mini-boss fights. Legend of Legaia introduced the tactical art system, a combat mechanic that let you input directional commands to execute martial arts combos. Think of it like a turn-based fighting game buried inside a JRPG. Each character had a grid where you could slot in moves like left, right, high, low, and certain combinations triggered devastating arts attacks. It turned every battle into a puzzle. Experiment with commands, memorize successful combos, and time them right to unleash full power. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, you also had spirit points to manage. An evolving system that bonded you with magical beasts and a progression loop that made grinding feel strangely addictive. It was deep, fast-paced, and way ahead of its time. Not to mention the soundtrack, which slapped way harder than anyone expected from a game that got almost zero marketing love. It's the kind of game you discover late, fall in love with, and immediately start wondering why it's not already on a remake wishlist somewhere. And now that we've reminded everyone this game exists, can someone at Sony please wake up and give Legaia the respect it deserves? Now let's talk about Kudelka, a game so overlooked it might as well have been locked in a haunted mansion with the lights off. which is honestly fitting, considering that's basically the vibe. Released at the tail end of the PS1's life cycle, Koudelka was dark, weird, slow, and stubbornly its own thing. It mixed survival horror and turn-based RPG in a way that didn't exactly scream mass appeal, but if you were one of the few who gave it a chance, you know how oddly unforgettable it is. This was the prototype for what would eventually become Shadow Hearts, a cult favorite RPG series from the PS2 era. But Koudelka itself leaned way harder into horror. We're talking creepy monasteries, disturbing cutscenes, and combat encounters that felt more like desperate prayers than heroic battles. The tone is grim, the pacing is slow, and the entire atmosphere practically reeks of decay. And that's not a complaint, it's part of the charm. It's like the game knew it wasn't for everyone and didn't care. It wasn't trying to win popularity contests, it just wanted to haunt your dreams a little. On the mechanics side, Koudelka does something pretty unique for its time. It uses a grid-based movement system in battle, combining strategy RPG elements with traditional turn-based combat. But here's the twist. Your characters don't level up automatically based on predefined stats. Instead, you manually distribute stat points after every battle, giving you full control over how each party member evolves. Want to build a magic-focused bruiser with zero defense? You can. Want a tank that can't hit a moving ghost? Go for it. The game lets you break the rules, and sometimes punishes you for it in the most brutal ways. Combine that with a limited inventory, weight-based equipment restrictions, and a painfully slow animation system, and you've got a game that demands patience, planning, and just a touch of masochism. But for the right kind of player, it's a hidden gem that still holds its eerie glow. If you've never played Breath of Fire 4, you might want to clear your weekend. This is one of those games that quietly shows up, looks you dead in the eyes, and reminds you why turn-based RPGs used to dominate entire childhoods. Released at a time when everyone was obsessed with clunky 3D models and edgy realism, Breath of Fire 4 stayed committed to lush 2D art, atmospheric world-building, and a story that walks a fine line between classic fantasy and full-blown existential dread. And somehow, despite all that, it still ended up criminally underappreciated. You get a deeply emotional narrative split between two wildly different characters, Ryu and Fulu, each with their own motivations and moral paths. And the best part? The game makes you play both. You don't just hear about the villain's backstory, you live it. Combine that with a sleek battle system that lets you chain spells, steal abilities, and morph into dragons mid-fight, and what you've got is one of the most polished RPGs of the PS1 generation that way too many people slept on. But here's the good news. Breath of Fire 4 just got a fresh port on GOG, and it's hands down the best way to experience the game today. The version comes with widescreen support, improved compatibility for modern systems, and zero hassle when it comes to performance or controls. It's a clean, no-frills release that preserves the original visuals and soundtrack while making the game actually playable without needing to dig out an old CRT. GOG's version even lets you easily mod in a few visual tweaks if you want, like smoothing out sprite edges or adjusting filters. So if you've been curious but didn't want to deal with emulation drama or flaky fan translations, now's the perfect time to dive in. Time to talk about the one that started it all, Suikoden. And no, I'm not talking about the second one that everyone and their grandma keeps praising. I mean the original, the quiet foundation of the entire series, the one that walked so Suikoden 2 could drop-kick our emotions off a cliff. Most people skip straight to the sequel, and yeah, it is the better game. But writing off the first Suikoden is like skipping the first half of a great movie and still expecting the ending to hit. You're missing the setup, the tone, the roots of something truly special. What makes Suikoden stand out isn't flashy visuals or a groundbreaking combat system. It's the fact that even in its debut, it came swinging with a political drama way deeper than it had any right to be. Instead of chasing dragons or crystals, this game dove straight into empire building, betrayal, and war. It's basically Game of Thrones if everyone wore headbands and had anime hair. And for a PlayStation 1 RPG from 1995, that was bold. This game didn't just ask you to save the world. It wanted you to lead a revolution. On the technical side, Suikoden introduced a surprisingly ambitious system for its time. 108 recruitable characters known as the Stars of Destiny. Sure, not all of them are game changers in battle. Some are just chefs, blacksmiths, or weirdos who play dice, but each one contributes to your growing headquarters, turning it from a bland castle into a bustling mini-kingdom. And when it comes to combat, the game flexes 3 distinct styles: standard party battles, one-on-one duels with timed decisions, and large-scale army wars where positioning and strategy actually matter. It's this variety combined with the recruitment obsession that gave Suikoden its addictive rhythm. One minute you're fighting soldiers, the next you're recruiting a talking raccoon who somehow helps you overthrow an empire. And now with the HD 2D remaster, there's finally a definitive way to play. The visuals strike a perfect balance between retro charm and modern polish. The UI is cleaner, and small tweaks make everything more fluid. It's hands down the best version of Suikoden 1 and 2 by a mile. Now let's talk about Parasite Eve. A game that felt like someone at Squaresoft said, "Okay, but what if Resident Evil and Final Fantasy had a stylish, slightly unhinged baby in a lab?" And then Parasite Eve just showed up in a leather jacket, tossed the RPG rulebook out the window, and confidently strutted into your memory card. This game hit right at the tail end of the PS1 era, when Squaresoft was firing on all cylinders and somehow still had time to experiment. The result was a cinematic, horror-tinged RPG that didn't just stand out. It burned itself into your brain with mitochondrial fire. But of course, nothing this bold gets off scot-free. The series is still tangled up in some weird copyright limbo that makes Square flinch every time someone mentions it out loud. Which is a shame because the first game in particular was packed with ambition. Between the creepy science fiction setting, a heroine that was way cooler than most leads of the time, and an atmosphere that oozed late 90s suspense, Parasite Eve was the definition of a cult classic before the term even got trendy. Instead of relying on traditional turn-based battles, Parasite Eve mixed real-time movement with a timing-based combat system tied to an active time bar. You could freely run around during fights to dodge enemy attacks. Yep, on screen, in real time. Then wait for your bar to fill before unloading with firearms, magic like parasite energy, or good old grenades. Positioning mattered, enemy patterns mattered, and combat felt tense without ever losing its RPG soul. And let's not forget the weapon customization system, which let you transfer abilities between guns and fine-tune your loadout in surprisingly deep ways. It was tactical, it was weirdly flexible, and it laid groundwork that would echo in games like Final Fantasy 12 years later. Alright, now I want to hear from you. Did I miss any hidden gem that deserves to be on this list? Drop it in the comments. I read and reply to every single one. And if you enjoyed the trip down memory lane, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It keeps the nostalgia flowing and the uploads coming.